Holly, over to you.
Thank you so much. Can you hear me okay? My AirPods were not excellent.
Yeah.
All right, so let me share my screen. And can you all see just the screen or can you see both monitors?
We see just your slides. That's starting.
Perfect. Thank you so much. Excellent. So hello, everyone. My name is Holly Reynolds, and I am the Senior Product Designer for the Product or Project Management Group here at GitLab within the plan stage. And today, I'm going to be talking about validating the category maturity of issue tracking. I tried to include links to everything in the slides in the presenter notes. So if at any point you want to go back and look at maybe some of the mural boards or issues associated with it, hopefully everything is included there. So this was a really big project, and I'm going to go through it kind of quickly for time's sake, and it doesn't nearly cover everything that was involved with it, but hopefully it will give you just some highlights of what was completed. I'm also not going to spend a ton of time going into what the category maturity scorecard process is, as there's extensive documentation about it in the handbook. But it's essentially a summative evaluation where we're trying to understand how well our category performs as an existing shipped product, kind of similar to a benchmark. And maturity is classified as one of 5 categories in our handbook, which are planned, minimal, viable, complete, and lovable. So issue tracking as a category at the start of this process was classified as complete. And that basically means that GitLab dog foods it exclusively. It has at least 100 customers using it, and it has a UX Lite score of at least 3.63 for main and related jobs to be done when tested with external users. This was associated with a key result for the second quarter. It's an OKR for improving the lovability of issue tracking. And that key result specifically was to validate the current complete maturity rating and understand basically if we're still at complete and how changes to the product might have affected issue tracking over time. So in order to obtain this UX Lite score, I needed to create scenarios for users to work through in a live product based on plans, jobs to be done. I needed to first fully understand what the category of issue tracking meant, and then how that definition and our jobs tied together. Our issue tracking page states that its essential intent is to provide a single source of truth for an idea from inception to implementation, and that members of a community should be able to trust and effectively collaborate on it from anywhere within GitLab without slowing down their current flow. This felt a bit large. Parts of it seemed kind of difficult to pull tangible scenarios from for me. So I started by outlining some questions. For example, what exactly are the points of inception and implementation? And how can we validate something that is a single source of truth? How can we validate that it is the single source of truth for an idea? How are specific features which contribute to the overall category offering of issue tracking performing, and what are those specific features? So I collaborated with my PM and research on the statement and then iterated on it, revising it to issue tracking is the process of documenting, planning, organizing, and tracking work and team progress with issues. Now, issue tracking obviously can and does encompass more objects than just issues. We have epics, we have merge requests, we have other things associated with kind of the concept of tracking an idea. But the majority of our focus for this particular research was centered around issues specifically. I felt with this revised statement that I could start to outline the specific jobs, personas, features, and touch points associated with the category, and therefore begin to outline some scenarios for testing with users. So I started with our planned jobs to be done, which we'd recently created in a series of collaborative sessions with all of the designers and PMs. I reviewed these with Catherine and Lori to verify that they were well structured. Catherine, as awesome as she always is, created an initial set of secondary stories, which I revised and iterated on, and that was a huge help to kind of give me a baseline to start with. identified the personas that would seek to hire GitLab or issue tracking specifically for these jobs. And next, I looked for opportunities where there was overlap in these responsibilities. Again, just trying to kind of narrow things down, simplify things, and look for ways that I could pull out actual scenarios and tasks to test with users. From the jobs, two primary roles began to materialize. Obviously, many of our users use issues and issue tracking, but I knew I could narrow it down to the personas most impacted by this. And I felt that those personas were Sasha and Parker. Parker being the sort of product manager role and Sasha being more of a developer type of role. So here's an example of the structure that we had in Mural with these primary jobs at the top in yellow, followed by secondary and related jobs in orange, some possible scenarios for testing in pink, and then maybe the associated tasks with those scenarios in blue. And I think there's a link to that as well if you'd like to actually see that board in the slides. Then I took those personas and created some high-level journey maps outlining a flow for how our jobs tie into their day-to-day. We needed to conduct a minimum of 5 interviews per role. And after evaluating the jobs and working through those journeys, talking with research and talking with my PM, I felt we had those 2 primary roles encompassed within these personas. So again, we've narrowed it down now from the personas to the 2 personas of Sasha and Parker. And then after evaluating all of the jobs themselves and how they related to the other personas that potentially had overlap with Sasha and Parker, I came up with these 2 roles of the issue tracker and the issue worker. And the issue tracker is typically someone in a leadership position for a development team that needs to be able to track and evaluate work and understand its progress. The issue worker is the person typically who actually does that work, such as an engineer or a designer. And then I determined core tasks associated with those roles that were again considered to be key aspects of the issue tracking category. From there, took those ideas and all of that information and started to create some scenarios. So I started out, I think, with 10 to 15 scenarios initially for each role, outlining how those roles use our jobs to be done as part of issue tracking, and then iterated on them a lot. Pedro was doing the same process, but for code review at the time. He was a massive help to me through this process. And so we bounced ideas off of each other, and I looked at how he was structuring his scenarios and shared my scenarios. And just that collaboration process really helped in sort of narrowing down and iterating on these scenarios until we felt like we had a good place to start to actually test with users. Catherine, my PM, Andy, and Lori were also, I think I put Andy, but I meant Anjay, I'm so sorry. We're also part of this process. So thank you all again for your help with that. We determined the types of candidates that we needed to speak with as part of our research strategy. So this included the issue tracker role, which was dev managers, PMs, and IT managers. The issue worker role, which included engineers, designers, and testers. We decided that we would want to have a minimum of 7 per role, which would mean that we would need to have 14 total sessions with users, and created a screener survey to start understanding and evaluating who might be good candidates for this, and had a handful of volunteers. Pedro, Marchen, and Austin in particular stepped up and helped lead sessions. So thank you all so much again for helping with that, and to kind of spread out some of that responsibility. As far as the scenarios themselves, we had 14 total for the issue tracker and 13 total scenarios for the issue worker. And again, there were 14 sessions with each of those scenarios included as part of that process. So there were a number of insights. These are just a few, quite honestly, because I ran out of time for documenting, but there were so many amazing and fascinating insights that came from this. Including a number of the problems I realized were small interaction details. So I think we probably, most of us encountered the scenario of trying to add an assignee And when you add an assignee, for example, you click the name in the dropdown, but there's not a clear way to actually apply that assignee. You have to click away and then it sort of populates in that dropdown. This tripped up a handful of users. One of the scenarios that this was a challenge in was I had asked for, I think both roles, to show me how they would commit someone to a particular piece of work. And so they, most cases, found assignees pretty easily, but then they would trip up on that little interaction challenge of how to actually apply the person. Most people figured it out, but they gave us a bit of a lower score in terms of ease of use for this particular feature because of that. So people were also confused by the word participants and what participants meant in the product. This was a challenge for them as well. Quick actions were not discoverable, and we use primarily quick actions for a couple of things, such as promoting an issue to an epic. So, you know, having that option to make it into a bigger feature was something that just about no one found, even with given the opportunity to Google things and search for things, it just wasn't discoverable. Something that I don't actually have in my slides, and again, this was simply due to time, and I apologize for that, was that after each scenario that the user successfully completed, we asked them to complete 2 statements of whether or not the feature met their requirements and whether or not they found it easy to use. And then they rated it based on whether or not they thought that that statement of meeting the requirements and being easy to use was something they completely agreed with, they somewhat agreed with, they were neutral about, they somewhat disagreed with, or completely disagreed with. And there was a number associated with each of those, which we would then use to calculate that score. So I guess I did go into it a little bit here in the slides, but again, each of those scenarios was assigned a number. We also took an average of those numbers, tallied up the number of errors that the user may have encountered when kind of completing that process. This meant that we had to be very careful about how we define success, which is kind of an ongoing discussion still in relation to the process. The number of successes and fails, all of that kind of tied into this larger score. And if anyone wants to know more about that scoring process, I'm happy to get with you offline and go into that a little bit more in detail. To sum it up though, our UM/UX Light score unfortunately went down just a little bit. It is at 3.44. I identify that as complete. I think technically it puts us at viable. But because we do have a minimum of 100 customers using the product, and because we are using it exclusively, dog fooding it internally widely here at GitLab, to me, it falls into that category. But nonetheless, what that basically says is that we still have a lot of work to do. And I really believe that the insights and work that we have done here, the insights we have received as a result of that work, will greatly benefit us and inform our decisions moving forward as to how to improve this particular stage. So there was a lot to balance with this. As far as challenges go, you know, there was still kind of regular milestone and new feature work that needed to happen in addition to the work that went into this. But again, I had a lot of amazing people helping me. So thank you so much again to my PM Gabe, to Pedro for all of his help, to Mike Long for being there as a mentor and offering advice. Definitely Catherine and Lori and the other folks associated with research, and then for my volunteers as well. I feel like I'm giving an Oscar speech, so if I forgot anyone, I'm sorry. The phrasing of the questions, this was another challenge. I realized it threw people off at times, and I'm still not certain how that might have affected the results. So that's something that I think that we could improve on and explore in the future. Defining multiple success criteria, again, this was very important, we realized. So we couldn't just say there was one way to complete a scenario. One of the scenarios that we had was how users would identify something as a bug. What we were hoping for was that they would go to labels and apply the bug label, and many did, but not everyone did. Sometimes people would go into a comment section and state that it is a bug, and then notify the team. So there were multiple ways to kind of accomplish something and see it as success, but it wasn't necessarily the way that we had defined. So very insightful, but also a challenge in quantifying how we were doing. And then finally, there was also setup challenges. So for this, I had to create 14 different projects. I had to create one that was sort of a clean, pristine environment that had everything set up as I wanted, and then export and import 14 times or 13 more times to create that environment again and again, as well as provide the user with a username and password and access to that. And so there was a lot of setup involved to really get everything just right. As far as future, everything is in Dovetail. This was really helpful. So the videos are transcribed. There's an opportunity for tagging and adding insights. This basically gives us an opportunity to go back and look at all of that information and start to determine what we can do with it and how we might be able to use it. We plan to document and review those key insights and prioritize that information. Gabe created an epic, I think, earlier this week. So from that, we will start to document the information based on those insights in the form of issues, and hopefully get that prioritized and start working on these problems that we found as part of this process. That was everything that I had today. Thank you so much for listening and attending. And if you have any other questions, please just let me know.
What a great work and a great presentation, Holly. Thanks so much. It looks like a ton of work. It sounds like a great team you had there. Thanks a lot for showing such a detailed process, also for defining the main jobs to be done. I think that's a great example of what process we should follow. A quick shout out for any questions or any compliments. There's a lot of messages in the chat. All right, I take it as a no. Thank you so much again, and let me stop the recording.